So this is Antaraa Vasudev. She looks exactly the same in picture as she looks in real life. So this is a good sign. Most of the time we look different in our pictures and in our real life. And so Antaraa is very passionate about dialogue between citizens and government through the use of technology. So that is what she is super excited about. She calls herself an experimenter in the civic-tech space. So we will learn lessons in chemistry, physics, all sorts of experiments today. She's the founder of Civis, Civis.vote. You can find more about, you can always log into her platform, Civis.vote. It's a nonprofit platform, and she's the best person to talk more about it. In past, she has worked at the Asia Society, Democracy.Earth. She cut her teeth at Niti Digital, where she learned about the intersection of civic tech and citizens and government and all that kind of stuff. I met her accidentally at the Nudge Center for Social Innovation. In draw of lots, it so happened that she and I got into a mentor-mentee relationship where she was being incubated at the Nudge Center, and I'm a mentor partner at Nudge Center, so that's how we got to know each other. And obviously, in the very first conversation, I confused her thoroughly. So, but she knew that she had no choice but to keep at with me. And so she thinks societal platforms on Saturday mornings only. So every Saturday morning, we chit chat for half an hour, where she asks me good questions, I give her weird answers, and that's how we move on. So it's been fun. I think we've been at this for about 8 months now, ballpark. Right, Antaraa?
Right, about 8 months. Yes.
Super, about 8 months. So welcome to this conversation. And we look forward to, I think we look forward to really hearing from you. Where did all this begin? The first time you heard of population scale as an idea, share with us what was going on in your mind, what happened in those early days. Let's just start listening to what happened in your mind.
Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you everyone for having me here. I'm very excited to be having this conversation. So you'll be seeing me grinning a lot over the next hour or so. Please bear with that. I think, Sanjay, that's a really interesting question. And I think just to paint a picture of where we were, I think this was one of the sessions that Sanjay was hosting at the Nudge. And we had a bunch of maybe 10 or 12 entrepreneurs sitting in the room. And Sanjay was at the whiteboard drawing what he likes to call the pulse or the heartbeat of Indian education that you can see through the Diksha platform, and what they were seeing and learning through the data that was coming through that platform. And we were talking about scale, and I think it would be very accurate to say that a lot of us didn't eat dinner that night because we were so wrapped in that concept of how large the potential of impact can be. And the very next day, I think we were making those presentations, Sanjay, and I recall that a lot of us were saying, this is where we think we are right now, but actually after yesterday, maybe we can be somewhere else as well, and maybe maybe our goals are a little bit too small for right now. So I think it was a little bit of a eye-opener in terms of what is possible. I think a lot of us weren't looking at the possibilities of our work to actually scale to the extents that it has, that you illustrated for us. So I think that was one of the things that was very interesting for us, and also showed the possibilities of how we could get there. So that was...
Didn't you feel overwhelmed, worried, scared in some ways, or was it like, okay, fine, why not? What was going on?
I think definitely the reason why we didn't eat that night was because we were feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and also just very interested in some ways to figure out how is it that we can reimagine the work that we're doing, because it's not just scaling a program per se that would get one there, but it's actually reimagining perhaps the work that we are doing and how we are seeing the world to be able to scale at that level. So it was definitely a little bit overwhelming, and I think it was also uh, very thought provoking in how much you'd probably need to go back to the drawing board, or to start thinking about things in a different way if you wanted to get there. But I feel like that feeling of being overwhelmed also was quickly kind of, at least in our interactions, was translated into, okay, what comes next, what comes first, what comes next, how do we build the blocks, and slowly that helped. But definitely I think that entire evening is something I'm not going to forget anytime easily, because of this entire sort of churn in our own heads about how do you think at that scale.
Uh, I want to stay with that thought a bit. There would be some point where you said, okay, I'm going to, it may be that I'll do something about this. What was that moment? When did you think that you want to do something about this question of serving citizens of India at scale?
Mhm. Right. I think that question, um, we thought, it came to a point, I think, where also it wasn't something in abstract. If it was something in abstract, perhaps one would think that, okay, this is not something that I could possibly do. But in actually showing how the use cases that you shared with us about education and about actually building those concepts out, it made it a lot more tangible in the way that there was a path to get to that, to population scale, quote unquote. And it wasn't perhaps just an abstract idea that one could or could not do, but there were steps that we could also take to actually flesh out the work that we were doing and ensure that it engages more. I think for me personally, that was, I mean, it may not have come from a point of intentionally thinking, okay, we can do this. Of course, there is that, but also from a point of curiosity of like, how can we do this, and how will it work in Civis's case, and I think that curiosity was also a big driving force in kind of thinking more deeply about this and trying to plan for it as well.
In meantime, I've forgotten everything about what is Civis. So can you remind me what is Civis? What do you do?
Sure. Civis is a nonprofit platform that actually helps citizens and governments work together to draft laws and policies. The idea that we are working with is that there is a lot of constructive dialogue possible on India's laws, but it needs to happen in the right time. And oftentimes there needs to be a bit of a translator to take the citizens' voice to the government and the government's voice to the citizens. So we work in this process of public consultations, and we are running these consultations using technology.
So laws, are you a lawyer?
I'm not.
You're not a lawyer, but you're using a tech platform. Are you a techie?
I'm not. I'm not.
Then how come law, technology, you're neither a lawyer nor a techie? How did that intersect?
I think it that was quite. I have a political science background, so I don't have a law background, but I might be somewhere close. And I think for me, what was really exciting was that a lot of people at the time that I started becoming interested in this space in early 2014-15 were actually talking about how technology and policy are not two things that go well together. And I was a little bit curious to understand what are the use cases that can make them go well together, and how do we make sure essentially technology is just an enabling tool, and the tool can enable different processes. So why was it that the policy process was one that was not being enabled, or perhaps being as interactive as it could be, even though the technology existed? I think that was the point of curiosity. I mean, mm, I think personally, my own background is my parents were in the development space. My father was in agriculture. My mother worked with the revenue service. And as much as you, I guess, try and rebel in your teens, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. So I think it's been a really interesting sort of learning experience, and maybe perhaps because I came at it with a completely sort of having no prior knowledge. It's been the learning curve for me personally has been really sharp in this space.
So not a lawyer working on law, not a technologist using technology, never built a platform, decides to build a platform. Why?
I think for Civis also, we were trying and were very keen to understand a model for Civis for it to scale. I think before, coincidentally, just before we ended up interacting, Sanjay, this was one of my big questions, that this is social purpose organization, has a very strong purpose, but at the same time, the number of consultations or the number of laws that were coming out were considerably smaller at that time, and we needed it to reach more people for there to be a lot more engagement. So if I'm perhaps a citizen, or a government officer, I need to know that people are engaging with the process for me to actually come out and do this process more. And I think at that intersection, we were a little bit lost and looking for a framework for us to fit ourselves in, because it was part technology, part social, and that's where I think the platform concept actually really clicked with me, because I realized that there are essentially a platform, and I'm not going to attempt to define this because I'm sure I will bungle it up, but essentially it's a tool that has many different people accessing it and taking away something from the platform itself. And that is what we saw for the public consultation process as a whole. It needed government and citizen to speak to each other. It needed some sort of value of some sort to be exchanged. The citizen should feel appreciated. The government should get good feedback. So I think a culmination of that, the platform framework just sort of fit within a little bit of what we were seeing as murky waters before we understood really what the potential of a platform was.
Okay, so let's open up. Jack has his hand up, and I'm sure others have some reflections, some questions. So let's spend probably 5 minutes just listening, answering some questions from the friends here. Anyone?
Thank you.
Jack, go for
So
it.
I didn't understand. I have been trying to dialogue with my government and send them probably by now 500 suggestions, out of which they have only taken one or two. So how does government engage citizens? Because government already normally have their own plans. And I see most of the time they pretend to engage the citizen while they already have decided. And then they come and say, oh gosh, there are 300 opinions and we chose this one. And so the one that he chose is the one that he already decided. So is India operating in a totally different manner?
Great question, Jack. Thank you for that. I think it's interesting, and what we have tried to do is to make that process of the 300 suggestions a little bit less overwhelming and a little bit more intelligent, so that we actually are enabling the person on the other side to be able to make sense of the feedback that comes. I think in India also large volumes of inputs do end up coming in, and there is no dedicated resource to go through them or make sense of them. So I completely understand your point. There is still a lot of gap in being able to match what people are saying and what can be implemented. But we've seen in some laws, for example, recently on the transgender rules, there was up to 52% of citizens' feedback that was taken into account, and a lot of very uh, different provisions of the law were actually put out at a later stage. So it is early days, and I think in some ways we're still working on building that hypothesis. And I completely agree with you. There is a lot of times that it doesn't pan out, but once when where it does pan out, it's actually very encouraging to see, because the impact is on a very, very large population after that small intervention. So I see your point completely, but hopefully over time we'll have more engagement with the government
Yeah,
as
one example.
well. Mhm.
Yeah, one example.
Yeah, that's what Antara had shared, the transgender law. So Antara, you want to give a specific provisional example as to what provision was made into the law?
Absolutely. In 2020, when the law was put out, there was a provision which said that a transgender person has to go and get registered at the district magistrate by doing a physical verification. Now, a lot of members of the transgender community did not find that very comfortable to actually have to verify physically their transgender status. A few months later, that was perhaps one of the most debated provisions of that particular law. A few months later, we actually saw that that provision was removed, and now it is self-certification to just say that I am a transgender person, and that is enough to entitle you to get the certificate of a transgender person. So that was one.
Yeah. Thanks, Antara. Let's have Adam's question, please.
Thanks, Sanjay. Antaraa, that's amazing. Wow, well done on that. And Jack, I love the shirt. Super cool. Being a non-techie and going into a space where you had a feeling that something, there was a question that you wanted to answer, and then building a team around it that was a tech solution. I'd love to hear a bit about that, like how you just, where you went to, what you looked for in your team, so that you could kind of, build that tech backbone.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Adam. We are still early days yet in terms of building that out. But I think from our experience so far, we've also been very, very lucky to have this support ecosystem around us. So the incubator that Sanjay mentioned, Sanjay himself, and a lot of other people have invested a lot of their time in actually guiding Civis and making sure that perhaps we're on a path where we can answer these questions where I wouldn't personally have had answers to myself. So I think building that network has been really invaluable for us as an organization. The other thing that I think has helped us a lot is that we've also had partners who we've been working with on the development side of things. So a lot of it we don't do in-house, but rather engage with an outsourced organization to help us with the technology. The challenge there has also been that it's not just your own team that you need to align to a way of thinking, but also another set of people for whom you are one of their X number of clients. So I think that has been a little bit difficult, but more than anything, just can't acknowledge enough the support that we have gotten through this process and being able to think this way.
So let's move forward. We'll come back to some of the other questions. Antara, I'm always curious about the pivot, right? Because you had a running website, leaderboards, gamification. You had a bunch of people coming, engaging. You were happily belting away at urban laws. and then you started and you decided to pivot, right? So all the stuff started showing up, nouns, verbs, value interactions, core interactions, all the thinking around data architecture. And so obviously, what's your experience at going through this in stages? What happened first and then what, and then what? How did this unpack for you? Like in your mind, right? Because we have a certain theoretical way of explaining, but you actually lived that every week. So what happened? Tell us more.
I think it took me 3 months to understand where we were. To I remember the day when it clicked and it made sense, and that was quite exciting. But I think it also takes a lot of time. What we had was a little bit of rhythm to go back and forth. So. I remember when we first mentioned the concept of nouns and verbs, I was so flummoxed. I think like all of my English teachers were flashing before my eyes, and I was trying to think which one taught me what a noun is and which one taught me what a verb is. And it was a little bit confusing to begin with. But what was really interesting is that some of the early guidance that we got in terms of setting things straight at that point has really helped us now. So I'll just illustrate with one example, Sanjay. So we created an Excel sheet of our nouns and verbs. And in the verbs, a lot of them I had put into place were two actions or weren't verbs. They didn't start with verbs. And I think one of the points of feedback that you had given me at that point is that it needs to start with a verb. And I was a little bit curious about that. But what happened many months later, and maybe just as recently as 1 or 2 months ago, is that when I say that certain person, citizen leader X, creates a consultation, all of a sudden I have a activity that the technology side can read and say, okay, fine, this needs to be a right application. I'm probably getting this wrong, but there needs to be something that that actually connects to this action. So while initially it was a little bit confusing, and I think it was just taking one step at the time. Like we worked on the nouns and verbs 1 week, we reviewed it the next, and then after that we I remember like a few weeks in, going through my notes, I saw it said highlight these verbs. How do you select what to highlight? That back and forth, that rhythmic back and forth actually really helped us piece it together. But to say that I understood it fully at the beginning, I didn't. I probably still don't. I think it's just pieces of it that were making sense. But the encouraging part, and I think what kind of was keeping me going, was also that we were seeing some amount of uh, increase in our impact very early into the journey as well. And I think that was one of the things that said, oh, okay, like just creating an Excel sheet, I haven't changed anything on the website, I haven't altered anything radically, I've just created an Excel sheet which has told me that I can communicate with people, keeping their uh, motivations in mind. And all of a sudden I'm communicating with people keeping their motivations in mind, and all of a sudden more people are coming to engage with the program. I think it was just those small things. It didn't take any sort of big action, but just those small things were actually helping reinforce how this thinking could play out, even though maybe for some time I didn't understand it fully or see it completely in its entirety.
I remember that call where you came with data saying, I don't know why the engagement has gone through the roof. And then you got into data and analytics. I remember you drawing your charts and saying, why? What happened? What have I really done differently? And you actually got to it as to what you had done differently, because some of the aspects of virality and how do you create viral interactions, instinctively you had applied them, and you had started seeing. So that I recollect that day where you saw an interesting change. And then, you said, okay, I want to build something and engage 1 million residents. So why 1 million citizens? What got you to that place saying, not 1,000, 2,000, I want to engage with 1 million citizens?
Um, some part of this comes back to also a little bit of what we can do for public voice to be to perhaps be heard or to be understood. And one of the things there is also, while you need a lot of quality inputs, you also need people to be engaged in the process for the other side of the coin to say that I want to continue to engage in this process. So that was one of the reasons. But that being said, I mean, even 100, 200, 300, 1,000 could be construed as enough. I think one of the things that I do see is that the work that we do on civic engagement on laws and policies can have a transformative impact, not just within our own circles, but much more broadly. And
Hmm.
that is one of the reasons why I've always been sort of keen to see that it reaches the largest number of people. Now, 1 million is um, a benchmark which looks big right now, and I'm hoping one day we will see 2 million and then 3 million after that. But I think it just is one of those tools that can be used very widely if we just make the process of engaging easier. So that is where I think the 1 million number came from for starters.
And then one day you said, I need to add more nouns, and I need to look at partners. I need to start building an ecosystem. And in same refrain, you started thinking about, I need a different architecture. I need this platform to be redesigned, rethought. What, like, you were happily doing nouns and verbs, and your Excel sheet and adoption was growing, and you had started thinking about promises and bargains and rules and tools, that kind of a conversation. And then you come up with this thing saying, no, I think I need to flip to an ecosystem. I need to re-architect. What was that pivot? What made you take that step? Because, I also am very deeply cognizant of the fact that you are an extremely early stage organization. As it is, the NUT CSI incubates organizations which are 0 to 3 years. How old is your organization?
We will be 3 in April of this year. So just
Correct. So it's extremely early stage, right? Where you're still sort of, but you're already now thinking about nodes, edges, verbs, thinking about architecture which is scalable, and having a deep conversation with Pramod Verma is not easy, but I've seen you have that in terms of, so what's going on, right? Why are you able to, I'm always curious as to, and you're not a lawyer and you're not a techie. So that makes me even more worried as to what's going on here.
right. I think coming back to the Excel sheet, I think at some point we hadn't seen the full extent of what we could do and who we could serve. Um, Government enabling government citizen interaction is just one of the things that can actually get us towards our mission of I mean towards our vision. It's not perhaps the only thing. It's one of the ways that it can be engaged, but there are non-profit partners who could actually also engage and help the process through. The Excel sheet, I think, also helped in seeing who else is there in the ecosystem. Because if we were looking at it the way that we were up until then, it was there are just two focus groups, and there continue to be two focus groups. But all of a sudden, there is the possibility of these various offshoots of I'm trying to look for an analogy to describe it well, but there are these various telephone connections that can come out from the main connection, and the main connection can keep going. But all of a sudden, through these various smaller connections, there can be so much more sort of value that is distributed, and each of those can tie back to our main connection with their own insights and with their own learnings, and can strengthen that main connection between citizen and government. And that, I think, was really interesting, because I hadn't thought about it at all. And all of a sudden, it started coming together in a way of saying that maybe we could enable those smaller connections as well. And from the beginning, we've sort of been an open source platform, and we've wanted people to engage with our technology as well, and just take it and use it in any way, shape, and form that it works. But it I also started to realize that doing that, taking that platform in its entirety and implementing it elsewhere, or implementing it elsewhere, is very specific to our use case, and that doesn't always add value. So maybe it might be better for us to enable those little connections, or those little nodes, in a way that we can actually enable people to plug in and take what they'd like from what we have. I don't know if this is answered it, but I
No,
think
no,
where it's coming
it's
from.
it's very real. I'm trying to understand what's going on in your head, which is very real, right? There is, and meanwhile, your team must be thinking, "What is this girl smoking? Right? What's going on here?" Suddenly her language has changed, and she's throwing all these things. And you have a very small team. Just talk to us a little bit about. Meanwhile, your team is watching and saying, "What's going on, Antara?" So what happened? How did they come around to this line of thinking?
Mhm. I think that has been a very interesting challenge, um, because it's not just taking something that you're learning in one place and sort of transferring that knowledge. It's also actually exercise in getting them to buy into how this is going to unravel, while you're unraveling it yourself in your own mind. And that was really, really interesting. I think one of the things that we did is that for smaller projects, we started working on nouns and verbs, just for standalone like standalone one project. Okay, we'll try and figure this out. And in doing that, trying to get the team also to come on board and do that, and start thinking from that perspective, actually helped in using that sort of knowledge for the larger organizational goal that we had, and the work that we were doing on that front. It has been, I think, very interesting to see, because there have also been different reactions within the team. Some parts of the team have been very interested, and perhaps come to love it in some ways, where other parts of the team have been like, "Oh no, don't make me do this." Like, is there anything I can do to get out of this? I think there was also where like it became interesting, because it went back to the drawing board in trying to also illustrate the value of this process, and thinking about it, working on things together. And this entire time, we've had to also have the added complication of being remote, so not actually being in one physical space, and being able to kind of bandy about, and that was challenging. But it's come to a point, I think, where the team now is more or less aligned. It did take time, and part of it also because we were learning as we were going and unraveling the pieces. Um, the second challenge, of course, came, like I was mentioning to Adam, where you were trying to get your external partners to be aligned in the thinking, because I remember our technology team telling me and I told them, I said, we need to make this platform. I mean, this platform as it currently stands, it needs to scale. And they were saying, yeah, we're ready for scale. Don't worry, you put because the idea and the concept of scale is so different, right? They were thinking, okay, this language can take maybe 10,000 or 1 lakh concurrent interactions in a minute. They are currently at X number of concurrent interactions in a minute. We can just keep doing the same thing and keep doing the doing till we get to that. And then once we get close to that and it starts breaking, we'll figure out how to patch it. But that process has been really interesting to actually say that, no, it's not, we're not trying to patch anything. We're actually trying to build something in such a way that that it could be built for scale. I don't have a full realization of what built for scale means, but essentially not just scaling what you're doing currently.
That's a very simple explanation of scaling what works to what works at scale. I think you have said it better than me. The emergence of the early days of Antaraa the builder, because of late I have seen you in the network layer finding more and more connections. So you are actually building connections in the solution layers, more and more partners, and trying to figure out, I know that you struck deals with different kinds of people to actually build solutions, embed your platform into someone else, embed somebody else into your platform. You're trying now different kinds of constructs to go around this. And also the core fundamental digital backbone becoming the builder. I know that Abhishek Fraud, who is the chief architect of eGovernment's Foundation, he spent a lot of time to help you think through the architecture. And I was surprised yesterday when you wrote a mail to Pramod saying, you know what, I want to have a second architecture conversation. And Pramod, who declines 40 meetings every day, immediately came back and said, yes, I want to have this conversation because I know he has an eye for. So what's going on? Because, this is the early days of being, obviously you've never built a platform. Civis as a platform building is just beginning. But instead of sort of saying, yeah, I got the main ideas and let me move, you actually jump to the deep end of the swimming pool. Why did you do that? What was going on in your mind? That from a perspective that you would want to be a builder, what made you want to be one? Right.
Right. I think, Sanjay, you call it jumping into the deep end of the swimming pool. I think for us, it was also just walking down the inclination, perhaps. But I think I think it also comes back to when you see the possibilities of what can be, it becomes more and more exciting to say, okay, let's invest a little bit of time in this. Let's invest a little bit of energy in this, because this can have that amount of impact, which is a lot greater, perhaps. I think that has been one of the things that has been a little bit recurrent in wanting to do this. I also feel like seeing the potential of the organization, seeing the potential of the impact of the organization also has been really motivating in some ways. And because of the sort of logics that we set in place, and because of the frameworks that are there, it to me is starting to feel a little bit more and more real. Now, we're not there yet. We're very, very early. We haven't even perhaps written a line of code. It's just schemas and documentation and thinking this entire process through, which is where we are. But that potential is really exciting and worth investing in, because earlier perhaps you weren't able to see it. Now you can see it, and you can see that there has been something that has worked, and maybe you can replicate that in another domain, and maybe you can replicate that in another domain, and that's how we can kind of take it step by step. that piece has been a big motivating factor, I think, and we are still sort of figuring it out. But um, I think personally also the learning curve has been really interesting for me. And I think just thanks to Abhishek, who has really put in so much time and energy in sort of breaking down these concepts, getting us as a team up to speed, working with us now to the point where now he's in sync in such a way that we are getting things done a lot faster. uh, that has uh, that has also been really personally very interesting to see that, okay, how do you take this from something that you know theoretically and put it into play? So those are the two factors, I think.
What I've enjoyed the most is the change in your vocabulary. Now you talk about microservices and registries and certification, and that's like kind of sounds weird, but because I've never, and I have had zero role to play in you getting that language, but when I talk to you nowadays, you are like, you're sounding weird by the day. So, um, that's been fun. But I think the question also is that you are taking on something for which you would have to secure talent. You'll have to secure money. You would have to. This is a long haul. So on one end is fear, on the other end is hope. So what's going on? How will you muster the resources? What are you thinking, right? To actually embark on this over many years to come? What's going on in your mind?
Right. I think yeah, there's a lot of figuring it out as we go. I think in this last minute, you have given me a glimpse of what we're embarking on, perhaps more really than I have felt it. No, but I'm just jokes aside. A lot of it is. It comes back to those connections that we're building, because the more connections that we're building, the more possibilities we're opening for ourselves. Some could be possibilities to support the organization, some could be possibilities to support our research. There could be different pieces that now all of a sudden we're not really building in isolation the way that we were. We are but building in a collective way. And I think the interesting part for me is also to see how those collectives will start forming and contributing. Whereas earlier it was perhaps Civis working to secure support for Civis. Now we know that it's not just Civis working to secure support for Civis, but also the organizations that we are a part of, the networks that we are a part of, the people that we are enabling will come back in some way, maybe support us in doing some piece of what we're doing. And that's one piece less then that we have to perhaps build for or raise support for. We have, by opening this process up, we're actually creating those networks that will support us. I think that is one of the things that has been really reassuring also. And it is challenging, Sanjay. I mean, I think also just as a technology nonprofit, raising support, it's a slightly strange concept still. And there are these various sort of challenges of also being able to explain the work that you're doing. Why is it that X percentage of support actually goes into technology vis-a-vis something else? How is it that I mean, if we are looking at programmatic support, then how is it that you fit this piece of what you're doing into a program? And that is another sort of learning curve that we are on right now as well. But yeah, I do believe very strongly that now that we're not perhaps doing it in isolation or trying to work in isolation, that will come back in some way or the other. And I think that is really reassuring as well.
So let's take a couple of examples. This is an important point. So for example, you've been talking to funders. So when you talk about this idea, do they say, go away? What is this weird thing that you're talking about? Or what happens in that conversation? I know you've been talking to the government a lot, and also quasi-government bodies like the NIUA, etc. And so when you open up this conversation in this way, what happens? Is it received well? Do people engage? Do people think, or do they get you? Obviously, you don't use the lingo, thankfully, but the idea is the same: building an ecosystem, building a network supported by a backbone. What echoes back to you to give you this confidence that this network is a support spiral that over time it will support you?
Right, right. There's, I think, various different strains of this conversation. Part of it has also been unraveling smaller pieces of the puzzle. For example, we perhaps would speak to somebody about our government partnerships, and that is one piece in our larger puzzle, but that is something that they would be interested in. So part of it is also unraveling smaller pieces and perhaps sharing those pieces where you need to. But what has been really interesting to me also has been uh, the callback that we have gotten has been to perhaps oh, if you're doing this and you're using technology, maybe you can do that. And that is another perhaps service in our architecture, or another solution. We haven't even come to that part of actually talking about that, but oftentimes we hear that callback saying that, okay, if you're doing this, you could do that, and it's then easy to say, yeah, we're trying to do that. And along with that, this is the thinking behind the two that we are working on. Those conversations have been quite interesting. And there have, of course, been conversations where it just completely seems to be Greek. But what has been quite fascinating is also to see that I think the breakthroughs, when you're able to make sense, make it a lot of fun. So it may not be platform that we're talking about, but it may just be technology. And we're thinking of using technology in these 3 or 4 enabling ways. And right now we don't have too much of this, but we're looking to do that. And that has been quite interesting. And when it comes to government partners, nonprofit partners that we have, we are also trying to learn from them at the same time as we are trying to speak to them about what we are doing. And in that process, I think we've been taking a lot from those conversations, maybe more than the information we've been giving out. But I think it's been very fascinating to see those positive responses when they do come in. And I think just breaking down those pieces of the puzzle has been a little bit key to then maybe creating that hook to get somebody to come back and talk to you a little bit more.
Today, when we have a time on our calendars.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone else. Thanks for your patience, for listening in. And I hope you had a great time. And till we meet again with the next builder in line.